The lady in black asks if I have ever seen stars. I tell her I have, and we look up at the cloudy sky. I want to say something more about the stars, but can't recall what they look like, how many there are in total, and if they cluster in some recognizable formation. Are they static or moving? Do they flicker or glow like bulbs? And I begin to doubt whether I have seen stars at all, or if I know of their existence only indirectly, through my mother or my father or someone else who had taken it upon themselves to teach me what I don't remember. Because the only reality that remains from that time are feelings and ideas, and whether I authored them or they were placed within me is impossible to know. Hello everyone and welcome back to Shelf Life. This is Simran and this is my podcast Shelf Life. We talk about books, their philosophies, but most importantly, our personal relationship with a book. I am very excited to be talking to you guys again, and I know this feels a little different. This entire format of, we're doing some tags now, and I'm doing a couple of just, get to know me more videos, but I think it's really going to help us in building this community more, and me learning about you and you learning about me is always going to be beneficial for the channel. So I'm very glad to be back and talking about books, and one particular book every week, and I just love doing that, and I'm glad that we're back to that. And yeah, it's a beautiful morning today. I think it's been really good weather here in Navi Mumbai. It's been very cold and pleasant and cozy, and it's today, the day I'm recording this, the day you're listening to this, of course, is different, but the day I'm recording this, it's the one after Republic Day, so it's been, there's been a break there, and I just took this time to really just think about the books I've been reading and the feelings that I've been feeling with those books and everything. So I've just taken that time to spend it with myself and with these books that I love. So yeah, it's a beautiful morning today, and I hope that wherever you are, wherever you're watching this from, it's a beautiful morning there as well. If you're watching this at night, I hope that you've had a good day. Now, the reason I started with that paragraph in the beginning of the episode was because it's a direct quote from the book that we're going to be talking about today, which is Girl in White Cotton by Avni Doshi. Now, before I get into the book, I want to talk a little bit about something that I saw on Netflix. Okay, so I had some time, and recently I finished this show called Wild Wild Country. And I know I'm extremely late to the wagon. That show released in 2018, I believe, and I'm extremely late, I know. But I recently finished it, and if there's any of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Wild Wild Country is a Netflix show. It's a documentary about the Rajneeshis, who were, the Rajneesh, they were part of the Rajneesh cult, which was headed by this man called Bhagwan Shri Rajneesh, who was a cult leader. And the Rajneeshis are now known as, they're seen as a cult, but at the time I guess they were not, because people were just very confused as to what they were and where they came from, what they wanted, everything. And of course it's one of the most controversial cults to have ever emerged, and also very well known. And I was just thinking about, there's explicit footage from within the cult premises that they show in that documentary, and there's a lot of revelations that happen as well. And when I was watching it, I was really thinking about, what happens to the kids of cult members, kids who are either born in the cult or who have moved with their parents into that cult very young. So what happens to these kids, and how are they how do they grow up, what do they learn, because these are essentially children who have had no formal education, but also who have not, gone to or lived in society as we see it. So I was really interested in that, and I used to really think about what happens to those kids and how do they, upon leaving the cult, how do they re-enter into mainstream society and all of those things. So I was thinking about that, and I think, I don't think this is pure coincidence that I picked up this book just as I was having those thoughts. But I feel like there is some sort of divine order to these things. I think, and we have discussed this multiple times, I do genuinely believe that books intertwine with your present circumstances, and I think they mix and mingle in this very beautiful but random and absurd way that just will not make sense to anyone but you. But I'm trying to, what I'm trying to get at is that I was watching that show, and I think side by side I was reading this book as well. And the reason I mentioned that is because Girl in White Cotton has a very, very, of course it has a section that talks explicitly about cults and the experience in a cult, but it has a lot of overarching imagery of cult, I want to say. It has that what you see cults as, that whatever you associate with the experience of a cult, this book encompasses all of that. So before I get into the specificities of it, I just want to tell you about Girl in White Cotton, okay? So Girl in White Cotton, a novel written by, debutante Avni Doshi. It's about primarily two people, a mother and a daughter, but more specifically about the daughter. So the daughter's name is Antara, and she is a young woman living in Pune with her husband, Dilip. Dilip is, of course, he's not from Pune. He is an Indian. He is of Indian origin, born and bred in the US. So he's very, very American in that sense, and that plays a very huge part in the book as well. But so Antara is a woman in, she's an artist who's living in Pune with her husband, and the book starts with her mother, who is Tara, being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So Tara is her mother who lives alone, and she's just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and there's a lot of episodes that she has where she's just wandered off into the street, and she's left the gas on, and all of these things. She's actively forgetting things and behaving in erratic ways. And when she's diagnosed, things become a lot clearer, but they also become a lot more muddled for Antara, because Antara has never had a very simple relationship with her mother. And in that journey of Antara taking care of and also actively conflicting with her mother Tara, you see how their past also unfolds and kind of provides an explanation for how they are and the way that they are. So the narrative kind of just goes everywhere. It takes you from the present to the past, and it's very quick. So perhaps one chapter is from the present and the other is from 1980s. So it's a lot, it's very all over the place, and as you are trying to get to know these characters, you are also trying to understand their past and how that plays a role in who they are right now. So specifically it's about Antara, because this is her point of view. The book is written in first person, and it's about how Antara sees the world and how she sees specifically her mother and her grandmother. But it's also about all these other interesting characters, like an estranged father, about Dilip and how her relationship with Dilip is, and about past loves and heartbreaks and her relationship with artistry, with where she is from, and with her grandparents, and a lot of these things. So A Girl in White Cotton is very, very interesting in that way, because it is talking about these two people, but it's also involving a lot of other very important characters. So in the past, of course, when I say that Antara doesn't have a good relationship with her mother, is because her mother kind of uprooted Antara when she was very young. Tara left her husband and his family, and she went to live with Antara in an ashram, in the cult that I was talking about. So a lot of people online, by the way, just as a side note, a lot of readers, in fact, have pointed out that the ashram that they both go to live in seems a lot like Osho's ashram, the Rajneeshi ashram in Pune, but of course, it's not mentioned anywhere in the book, but it's very, very similar, right? And there is this Baba in the ashram, and the mother grows very close to that Baba. And there's also this other figure, kind of like this, the Baba's right hand woman, you could say, like a secretary of sorts, called Kali Mata, and she kind of really, really impacts Antara, who was a child at that time. And so it's a very interesting story, and it takes, it jumps across a lot of these incidents that have happened in her childhood. So from the cult, they are practically, when they leave the cult, they are practically left as mendicants. They're beggars, they're begging on the street. Her mother refuses to go back to her grandparents' place, and also there is a time when Antara is sent to a boarding school, and from there the book kind of takes on a very Jane Eyre sort of persona. And so there's a lot of these elements, right? And what I want to specifically talk about today is themes of the book, and these are particular instances that I felt like it just sort of blew me over, and I want you to know about it so that you can also read the book perhaps later on. So I think the one thing that really stood out to me, and I want to stay away from talking about just the mother-daughter relationship, right? I don't want to get into just the overarching things of maybe neglect or child abuse or the estrangement of mothers and daughters and all of that. I don't want to just talk about that. I want to talk about a lot of these other emotions also that you read about. So the first one that I felt very strongly was the theme of captivity. This idea that people are just held captive by their memories. And I know that we've talked about memories a lot in these in other episodes, but captivity was, I think this book captured it better than I think captured it. Wow, okay. This book captured captivity better than any other book I would have read. So there's this very strong thing of ownership and ownership of narrative, and that struggle is constant between Antara and Antara's own version of her mother. So Antara, because of everything she's been through in her childhood, feels constantly like she is being held captive by her mother's personality and her mother's realities. So she feels constantly like an outsider in her own world. And you read about this a lot when you're talking about, even when you're talking about something as basic as people who have very flamboyant mothers or celebrity mothers and all of that, right? You hear about that, about celebrity moms and really dynamic mothers, and how they raise very scared but also very rigid children. And I know that's a very broad assumption to make, but I think it kind of plays with that with that assumption a little bit, the book really plays with that idea of what it means to be held captive by another person's personality. And I don't mean that, of course, in a very romantic way. You don't mean that in a positive way. You mean that in a sense that you are continuously isolated because someone around you is just so either messed up or taking so much space, or just having all of these tendencies of just being out there. So I want to mention, like, for instance, there's a part in the book where Antara, when she is really struggling with sanity, when she is really struggling with keeping it together, there's a part where she mentions that, she's talking about how she feels like her limbs are getting longer, and they're just stretching out. And she's talking about how she feels like she is just becoming bigger and bigger and taking up too much space. She feels like she is trying to fill something inside of her, and she fills that up with food as well. She binge eats, and she is trying to fill that void, but she feels herself getting bigger and bigger and taking too much space. And even though she wants to take up that space, even though she feels like she's been denied that, she is scared of doing that. She's scared of taking up that space. So, it's very interesting about how captivity plays. I mean, I'm just guessing, if you're diagnosed with something like Alzheimer's, where you're constantly forgetting your memories, you're constantly forgetting things, what you want perhaps the most is to hold captive your imagination, to hold captive your reality, right? I mean, you can think about that in n number of ways. Like, even when I'm going to take a very colloquial thing here. If you've ever broken up with someone, if someone you love has left you, that could be a family member, that could be a loved one, a romantic interest. If someone leaves you, the first thing that you want to do, you want to establish control. And the way you establish control is that you want to take back all of those memories, and you want to take back your side of the memory. You want to reclaim your memories. So you start obsessing over it. You start obsessing over the times you spent with that person. And when you do that, when that obsession spirals out of control, your memory itself changes. So you just hang on with me here, okay? Yeah, I'm trying to tell you about how fragile and about how stupid memory is. If you obsess over something enough, if you replay a certain event or a certain incident over and over again in your own head, your memory of that event will change. Memories are not fixed or constant, and this is something that Antara and Tara both do not understand in the book, because they are so obsessed with memory, Antara specifically, so obsessed with her side of things, her reality, her memory, that she cannot let go of the fact that perhaps her memory could be wrong, her memory could be tainted, and that keeps her in a spiral of conflict with her own self and with her mother. So there is an incident in the book, and I'm going to try not to give you any spoilers, but there's an incident in the book, and it's a little bit towards the end, right, where Antara's mother, Tara, whom, by the way, we don't really hear from her throughout the book. We hear from her in very little, in very small fragments. So we don't hear her side of the story at all. And she barely speaks in the book. She barely has dialogues, right? So in one of the few dialogues that she has, she actually mentions, she says something about their time at the ashram. And she says that, you did not give me enough attention. You kept crying about, wanting to go back to your father, and you kept neglecting me. And this is her mother speaking. And throughout the book, you've been told how Antara felt the most amount of neglect from her mother, and that whole cycle started when they were at the ashram, because her mother, became enchanted by the Baba and all of that stuff. So you see that difference, you see that dissonance, and it's very interesting to note that. And once you've been, once you're halfway through the book, to hear that, to read that, feels almost as if you don't even know where you're going. You don't know what is happening. You don't know whom to believe. Do you really believe in Antara's point of view? Do you really believe that her mother perhaps was this human being who didn't care about her child at all? I mean, do you actually believe Antara's, story? And that puts so much into consideration. And that's where, Avni Doshi, I think this is the biggest triumph of the book. The fact that it makes you question everything. It makes you question yourself for reading that, or for believing in something. It makes you question what the meaning of love is, Is love simply showing concern and taking physically taking care of someone? Is Antara taking care of her ailing mother by staying with her or keeping her eye on her? Is that the definition of love? Is the definition of love Tara, who is the mother, taking care of her child and being present to all her needs? Is that the definition of love? Or is the definition of love something more than that? Can you love someone but not take care of them? Or can you take care of someone and not love them? It's a lot of, there's a lot of gray areas here. And I think, that it just, what Avni Doshi does really well is she uses language to manipulate your feelings, which is what most writers do. But she uses language in a way that it makes the story very, very disturbing. And I will give an example of this, where, there's, of course, like I mentioned, explicit description of, abuse and neglect, and there's a lot of instances where there's assault happening, and there's very vivid descriptions of smells, Antara talks about her body in a certain way, and she talks about a lot of things in very, very vivid details. So that, of course, that lends a sort of reality element to the entire story, but also it makes things very, very difficult to digest at the same time. And there's the opening line of the book is that I would be lying if I said that my mother's misery never brought me pleasure. And that itself, it's very hard to find sentimentality in that book. So you're sort of struggling, I am struggling right now to say that this book was heartbreaking. Because it wasn't heartbreaking, it was painful, yes, of course, but it wasn't heartbreaking, it was just very disturbing to get through, and that was my biggest thing. So I think I just felt so disgusted, disturbed, and just detached at the end of the story by everybody, by all the characters. Because you don't know what is the truth, and all of them are so flawed and so scary and so messed up in their own ways. And you really see Antara losing herself. You really see that, in her obsession with her past, in her obsession with her memories and reality, and her mother as well, in taking care of her mother, she herself has forgotten to take care of her own self, and she's just losing her grip on reality and sanity. And it's so interesting to see that that struggle of identity, and that struggle is very real in the sense that how do you define a caretaker? How do you define a child? And the whole book is about a reversal of these roles and the constant cycle of reversal. So, in the beginning, when Antara is a child, physical child, you see that she's compensating for her mother who's not present. You see that she feels the need to, really grow up, but at the same time she's stuck in that phase where she's little and she can't take those decisions for herself. But at the same time, when she grows up and she has to actively become a caretaker for her ailing mother, you see again how she does not necessarily fit that role, and she is still a child who is trying to find some sense of closure, and her mother is in herself struggling. So it's very confusing, but it's also very interesting to see. And there's metaphors throughout the book, right? There's a metaphor about this is the most famous one. It's about a fly, about how Antara is seeing this fly, just dawdling. I don't think that's the right word. She's seeing this fly around the room, okay? And she is seeing, and she's thinking about it, right? She's thinking about the fly, and she's thinking about how, if that fly would have mapped out all of the corners of the room, if that fly would have just known everything about everyone in that room, and whether that fly has perfect knowledge about things. And she's thinking about how even if that fly would want to leave, they can't. That fly can't. They're trapped. And that feeling of being trapped is obvious, very, very obvious in the book. And going over to the last part of this whole review / just opinion about the book, I just want to mention that I was reading again, like I said, I was reading a lot of these interviews that Avni Doshi made, and some interviewer had asked her about the male characters. And of course, it's a question that you get a lot, especially in movies or books about a mother and a daughter and their relationship. You get this question about how the men in that story might be a little bit one-dimensional and not very, nicely carved. So to that I would say that I personally felt like the male characters were, especially I think just one male character, Dilip, who is Antara's husband. I honestly felt like he was a very, very strong part in the whole book. I felt like he played a very important role. And the role of this aloof man who has no idea what is happening to his wife, and who is just so in his own world. And he says this very interesting thing in the book about trust, about how Antara cannot find it in her to trust her mother, which is why perhaps it is so difficult for her mother to imagine her as her child and to imagine that she is a human being. And again, it's very, I'm just paraphrasing here, but it's very interesting how Dilip brings that element to the story about trust, and about how Dilip is supposed to be someone that Antara can trust, right? Dilip is supposed to be the stable husband. He's supposed to be that element of stability in her life. But her aloofness from Dilip as well, her hiding things from Dilip, her, actively avoiding trust is something very interesting to see. So yeah, that's about it for the themes and the technical part of the book. And I think I just want to mention here that we've talked a lot about memory, and we've talked a lot about these things, but I think one thing that we didn't talk about here was the title, Girl in White Cotton. And I was thinking a lot about what that meant. And of course, if you look at the book, it is a clear reference to Antara's time at the cult, at the ashram, where they're all wearing white and they're all, doing culty things. So I know that probably means that probably is a reference to that time. But I think white in itself has a very, it has some sort of significance to the story, I know that white here is referenced because it means spirituality, it means blandness, it means just a lack of confusion. White is white. It doesn't deceive you to believe anything else. And I think that's the kind of life that Antara wished she could have had. Something of just plainness, something very, very simple, something she could understand. And the reason why she's obsessing with her past, she's obsessing with her memories. The reason why any of us obsess over our past is because we want things to be simpler. We want it easier to digest. We want things to be white. We want them to be spiritual in the sense that it's very easy to understand them, to reach them, to feel like we are one with it. But what happens is that memories are a collective construct. Memories are a collective act. We don't create memories in isolation. Those are fantasies, those are delusions. We create memories together. We create memories with another person. We are actively involved in the act of remembering. And when one person chooses to forget or happens to forget that act and they refuse to be a part of it anymore, that memory can get a little bit disturbing then. That memory can get diluted. That memory can get broken up in a lot of different ways. And I think, for a lot of Antara's life, white is something that she wanted, but white is also something that she detested because of her mother. It's also something that she was scared of. It's also something that haunted her, like it haunts most people. In India, white is the color of grief. White is the color of... white is what you wear to mourn someone. And in a way, Antara has been mourning her life, her mother, her existence, even before she could realize it. And it is in that act of mourning that she finds her solace, her closure. And when someone tries to mess with that, when someone tries to take that away from her, that is when she starts to lose it. And that says so much about where we are in life, Our lives are a constant struggle of power, of being either the child or being the caretaker. We are constantly oscillating between being vulnerable and being the owner of someone else's vulnerability. And this happens over and over again, And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about my own relationship with my mother, how we might have extremely different views about my childhood, how I may have perceived it completely different, and she may have perceived it completely different. And that happens over and over again with everybody. So what I want you to take from this episode here is, of course, one, read the book. It's beautiful and insanely painful but rewarding, and it will tell you a lot about yourself, and it will challenge you to think about your own realities and your own memories and your own insane things. And you must read it, but what I would suggest is that you read it perhaps with a parent or with someone who's been a caretaker for you. If you have a mother, you must read it with your mother. But if there is anyone that has taken care of you, or if you have a guardian or something, read it with them, because I think that collectively reading something might tell you a lot more about yourself and about your relationship with the other person. So I would suggest that you read this book with another human being who has some sort of relationship with you and who has been close to you in some way. So I would suggest that. But also, I think the question that I want to leave you with, the question of why this book was told, why this story was told, is because we need to examine ourselves. We need to examine people around us. We need to see and understand what power is and how it shifts continuously between people. Where does that power begin? Does it begin with the mother? Does it begin with the child? When does that power get transferred? How does that work? Is this struggle constant? Is the struggle necessary? Just think about that. These are things to think about. Hey guys, so my camera kind of died for the last bit of the episode, but I'm just gonna hop on over and say thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope you liked it. Tell me your feedback, tell me your comments, tell me your observations, tell me everything. Thank you so much, and I will see you next week.